At 0923 hours, June 14, 2025, the USS Princeton was cruising the South China Sea on what should have been just another routine patrol. Freedom of navigation. The same kind of mission American sailors have carried out for decades without fanfare. But on this day, her powerful SPY radar picked up something that nearly lit the fuse on World War III. Far off the bow, a Chinese Type 052D destroyer, which had been quietly loitering at around 200 kilometers, suddenly surged. Its engines roared, accelerating from a steady 18 knots to over 30 knots in less than 90 seconds. That wasn't routine, that was hostile. Unknown to the Americans, the Chinese captain had just received his orders directly from Beijing. Intercept the Americans. Push them. Make them blink first. But here's the reality. Challenging the U.S. Navy in open water has never been anything but a catastrophic mistake. And Beijing was about to relearn that the hard way. Because the Chinese weren't facing a lone ship. They were staring down the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group, a floating fortress backed by 75 years of unmatched experience. Their mission was crystal clear: keep the sea lanes open. Not just for America, but for the entire global economy. Trillions of dollars of trade flowed through those waters every single year. And at that very moment, 180 nautical miles from the nearest Chinese territory, the strike group was operating in completely lawful international waters. Transparent intentions, predictable course, textbook professional conduct, the exact opposite of Beijing's reckless intimidation tactics. At 0926, the picture sharpened. Radar operators confirmed it. Chinese warship, Type 052D destroyer. Threat level, moderate to high. Inside the Princeton's Combat Information Center, no one panicked. The tactical action officer studied the Chinese vector with cool, steady confidence. After all, the Princeton carried 122 vertical launch cells, each one a potential coffin nail for any ship dumb enough to get aggressive. The SPY radar gave them every detail of the Chinese vessel. At its current speed, weapons engagement range was just 17 minutes away. 17 minutes until missiles could be flying. The math for the Chinese was brutal. Their YJ-18 anti-ship missiles could close the gap in under 4 minutes. But Princeton's SM-6 interceptors? They had a reach of 240 nautical miles. If Beijing wanted to gamble, they'd lose. At 9:29, the captain asked the obvious question. What's their intent? The answer came fast. At current course and speed, the destroyer would be in weapons release range in just 14 minutes. The prudent call would have been to sound general quarters, battle stations. But the captain leaned back and gave the kind of response only an American could. Let's see how badly they want to embarrass themselves first. That's confidence. That's discipline. That's a message. And it mattered, because this wasn't some empty patch of water. The South China Sea at that moment was packed. Merchant traffic everywhere. 46 commercial vessels within 50 miles. A Singaporean container ship carrying semiconductors. A South Korean LNG tanker worth $200 million. All of them depending on the U.S. Navy for protection. All of them in the crosshairs if Beijing had its way. By 0930, Princeton's advanced networking systems had already shared every threat detail across the strike group. The Nimitz herself, over 100,000 tons of American steel and diplomacy, carrying 90 of the world's most advanced aircraft, adjusted flight operations with the precision of a Swiss watch. Her escort destroyers, Changchun and Kidd, shifted into defensive positions, forming an iron shield around the carrier. If the Chinese fired first, It would be the last mistake they ever made. Then, things escalated. At 0935, the E-2D Hawkeye, orbiting at 25,000 feet with its God's Eye radar, detected multiple aircraft lifting off from the Chinese carrier Shandong. J-15 fighters, climbing hard, heading south. The Chinese were bringing their air wing into the fight. But here's the catch. Those J-15 struggled to climb. Why? Because the Shandong used ski jump launches instead of catapults. That meant every Chinese jet took off fuel-starved and weapons light. They looked menacing, but they were hobbled from the start. As if that weren't enough, sonar operators picked up another contact. A Chinese Type 039 diesel-electric submarine, 80 nautical miles out. But this wasn't a stealth predator. It was making so much noise, it might as well have been blasting heavy metal over loudspeakers. So let's recap. Beijing had a destroyer charging in, fighters clawing for altitude, and a submarine roaring like a freight train. It looked like a grand intimidation campaign, but it was theater. Theater with old, second-rate equipment. The Americans? They weren't intimidated. They were preparing a clinic. By 0937, the Nimitz flight deck became a scene of beautiful, controlled chaos. FA-18E Super Hornets from VFA-14. Top hatters thundered off the catapults every 45 seconds. Steam billowed. Deck crews choreographed a lethal ballet. American naval aviation projecting power like only it can. At altitude, the Hornets locked onto the incoming J-15S long before the Chinese even knew they were painted. Their AESA radars tracked dozens of targets simultaneously, while the Chinese fighters' outdated radars swung back and forth like clumsy searchlights. The gap wasn't a matter of years, it was decades. Then the Growlers entered the fight. The EA-18Gs fired up their jamming pods, and suddenly, the Chinese pilots weren't flying combat missions, they were flying blind. On their radars, phantom contacts appeared, disappeared, multiplied. American aircraft seemed to blink in and out of existence. Coordination collapsed. Meanwhile, U.S. fighters spread out into the wall formation, high, medium, and low. Overlapping engagement zones, mutual coverage, nowhere for the Chinese to hide. The J-15, forced to stay bunched together for visual contact, predictable, clumsy, and totally exposed. At 0947, the Chinese destroyer pushed the envelope further. Its fire control radar locked onto the Nimitz. In naval warfare, this is no joke. It's the electromagnetic equivalent of pointing a loaded pistol at someone's head. But the Americans didn't flinch. Princeton's fire control radars stayed in standby. Every firing solution was ready. Every missile locked in. The Chinese ship? It would have lasted about 30 seconds in a real fight. And then, lock released. Empty saber rattling. The kind of stunt you pull when you hope the other guy blinks. But the Americans didn't blink. They documented everything. In the skies, a reckless Chinese pilot dove at a Hornet in an aggressive close pass. The American responded with Top Gun precision, flipping inverted and sliding directly into firing position. For 3 heart-stopping seconds, his helmet display showed the Chinese fighter lit up in infrared, a perfect Sidewinder shot. But he didn't pull the trigger. Professionalism held. At 0951, the Chinese submarine finally tried to get clever. It raised its snorkel to recharge batteries. But the Princeton had been tracking it for an hour. Every move logged. If the order had been given, that submarine would have had less than 12 seconds to live. The Chinese had put themselves in a box. Destroyer to the west, carrier to the north, sub to the southwest. In a shooting war, none of them would have lasted 5 minutes. By 1430, the Americans decided to really drive the point home. The Nimitz launched everything that could fly. 48 aircraft roared off the deck, the largest single-carrier air power display in years. Growlers fried Chinese radar screens until they looked like abstract art. Hawkeyes commanded the skies. The Shandong's controllers saw nothing but chaos. And then came the knockout blow. A Virginia-class attack submarine, silent and invisible, surfaced just 6 miles from the Shandong. She had been tailing them for 8 days. 8 days without detection. For 90 seconds, she sat there, dripping seawater in the sun, daring the Chinese to look. And then she slipped beneath the waves again, vanishing like a ghost. The message couldn't have been clearer. We own the undersea domain. Back in the skies, the J-15s finally gave up. Low on fuel, out of options, they peeled away one by one. Some barely made it back, running on fumes, bingo fuel warnings screaming. They'd burned themselves out trying to match American pilots who weren't even breaking a sweat. By 1623, the Shandong's strike group retreated. Officially, Beijing claimed it was the end of scheduled exercises. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth. They came to intimidate, to flex, to claim waters that weren't theirs. And instead, they got schooled. The South China Sea wasn't theirs. It wasn't up for grabs. If China tried to get the United States military to blink first, it didn't work. We hope you enjoyed. Until next time, peace.